Hello and welcome to Film Peaks, where we investigate where film peaks or valleys. As usual, I'll keep this spoiler free, but I will include a riff section at the end where I show my score and give some thoughts. I show my score at the end because my score is a review of the quality throughout the film, and some people might view that as a spoiler, so I'll chuck it in at the end. Let's get going. So how do you make a grounded weather movie interesting? I'm not talking things like Twister or The Day After Tomorrow and anything crazy like that, like literally just weather. Well, you tie it in with World War II and you toss out a bunch of nerd shit. That's how. Yes, today we are talking about a new movie about the planning around D-Day, Pressure. Now, when people think about D-Day movies, they usually think about a few things. The invasion of the beach, the chaos, the soldiers charging in under impossible circumstances. What they probably don't think about, though, is a bunch of meteorologists arguing about weather conditions. Instead of showing us one of the most famous military operations in history, they instead show us the planning up to it from about 72 hours prior. Get it? Pressure. They're pressured into initiating the operation, but at the same time, they're measuring the atmospheric pressure. Yeah. Anyways, it's directed by Anthony Marra, who brought us Hotel Mumbai like a decade ago at this point. With those same vibes, he has turned weather forecasting into one of the most stressful experiences. The setup here is pretty straightforward. General Dwight D. Eisenhower has assembled the biggest force in history up until that point of about 160,000 troops ready to invade Normandy. Fun fact here real quick, after D-Day, the next biggest assault was actually Okinawa with about 250,000 troops. But in terms of modern day assaults, we had Operation Desert Storm, which was like 1 million troops. And then we also had the invasion of Iraq with about 300,000. But anyway, everything is ready. Millions of lives are in the balance. There's just one problem, the weather. Andrew Scott plays James Stagg, the Scottish meteorologist in charge of creating the weather forecast that would determine whether or not D-Day proceeds as planned or is delayed. And if he gets it wrong, well, thousands of people die. No pressure. One major thing working in this movie's favor definitely is Andrew Scott. This guy is pretty much incapable of giving a bad performance. Whether it's 1917 or Ripley or now Pressure, he has this incredible talent to make anxiety feel deeply human. Stagg is not portrayed as some larger-than-life genius. He's exhausted, he's uncertain, he's painfully aware that even the best science in 1944 contains an uncomfortable amount of educated guesswork. You can physically feel the stress just radiating off this man. Then you have Brendan Fraser as Eisenhower. Like, you gotta love this guy. Ever since his comeback with The Whale, I'm always excited to see what his next project is, and I'm very hopeful for the new Mummy movie. But Fraser ends up being this movie's kind of secret weapon, because instead of playing Eisenhower as this like untouchable historical icon, he plays him as this leader carrying an unimaginable burden. Every decision feels heavy. Every conversation feels like it could alter the course of history. There's this constant tension between wanting certainty and knowing that certainty simply doesn't exist. And Fraser really sells that conflict. However, there are some scenes where his innate silliness does poke through. Like, there's some jokes inserted here and there. The supporting cast is excellent too. Carrie Condon continues her streak of basically elevating everything that she's in. Like, most recently I can think of F1. But she definitely won me over with her performance in Banshees of Inisherin. If you somehow haven't seen that, check her out in that. Chris Messina is a great Irving Crick, whose competing forecasts delivers another layer of uncertainty. And Damian Lewis absolutely understands the assignments as Bernard Montgomery. This man was born to play overly confident British officers, and he is no stranger to World War II in general. I can't help but think about his aspiring music career at times, though. I can't play the songs for you, otherwise I'd get slapped by YouTube, so if you're interested, just look that up. What really surprised me, though, is how tense this movie actually is. It's essentially a chamber drama about people debating atmospheric conditions. There aren't constant action scenes. There aren't massive battles. Most of the time, these conversations take place in meeting rooms, and yet the tension is relentless because the film constantly reminds you what's at stake. These are not abstract decisions. These forecasts determine whether thousands of young men live or die, and the movie never lets you forget that. The pacing kind of also benefits from the audience already knowing the outcome. D-Day was successful. History tells us that much. But pressure isn't necessarily interested in the outcome. This is about the uncertainty that came before it. The agonizing process of making impossible decisions with incomplete information. There are several instances where Stagg says he is uncertain and it's impossible to be certain. It's about experts trying to analyze imperfect data while the world demands absolute confidence. It's about making the best decision you can and then having to live with the consequences. The cinematography here deserves a lot of praise. There's this constant feeling of confinement throughout the film. Even though the fate of the world is at stake, most of these conversations take place in confined quarters. War rooms, offices, hallways. It reinforces this idea that some of the world's most important conversations take place in rooms that aren't particularly remarkable. And there's kind of this overwhelming presence of silence throughout a lot of the film. Music is used very sparingly throughout this movie. It is very quiet. And usually whenever they do toss in music, it is specifically to raise that tension even higher. I really only noticed this because as I'm eating popcorn, I'm trying not to be too loud, and it was pretty hard to do. Now, with all that said, I think the movie does have a couple issues. The first being, I think you might be able to tell this film's stage play origins. Because this originally was written for theater, sometimes the ways in which a character explains things feels a little more theatrical than cinematic. Some viewers might also find the middle sections a little bit repetitive. There's a lot of forecasting, like looking at charts of wind patterns and things like that. There's a lot of meetings, and then there's a lot of debates over said forecasts. If you didn't know what you were getting into before watching this, you might have expected something more. This is definitely not Saving Private Ryan. So if you're expecting large-scale battles, you will walk away sorely disappointed. This movie is much more interested about the decision-making process rather than the battles. Also, I will say with the B story around Stagg's wife, I feel like that was brought to the forefront as being really, really important and then quickly kind of shoved aside until we could finally circle back around. But I do appreciate that this film does avoid the simplistic hero worship. Nobody here has all the answers, and everybody's kind of doing their best while carrying these impossible responsibilities. And that's probably closer to reality than movies usually allow. There are no easy victories here. Even success comes at an enormous human cost. The movie understands that war is not clean. Even the right decision will still leave scars. We are shown the consequences of miscommunication at a few points throughout the film, but it's kind of triumphant without being too celebratory. It acknowledges the importance of what was accomplished and the tragedy of what was required, which feels appropriate. I also think that pressure is going to surprise a lot of people, because it is very easy to dismiss a World War II movie that is about forecasting the weather. That doesn't exactly scream summer blockbuster to me. But underneath the historical framework is a genuinely compelling thriller about uncertainty, immense responsibility, and the people that history usually leaves out of the spotlight. Anyways, I'll call it here before we hit the riff section. So if this is your jumping off point, thank you for making it this far. Let me know what you think, either in the comments or on the Film Peaks app, free on iOS and on Android. We move on. All right, we've made it to the riff section. Last chance to avoid any sort of spoiler before I show my score and give some thoughts. Okay, so this is what I thought about the movie. I really enjoyed it. After probably the most amazing month for horror movies in the past several decades and several decades to come, this was a good transition, especially after Scary Movie 6. It's tense. It is incredibly well acted. Andrew Scott is phenomenal. Brendan Fraser gives us one of the best performances that he has given. And the movie's commitment to focus on the more human side of making these historical decisions really pays off. Again, it's probably not for everyone. If you're looking for a large-scale war and crazy battle scenes, this is not going to scratch that itch. But if you are interested in character-driven historical dramas that understand how to build tension through conversation and consequences, I think this will be absolutely worth checking out. Anyways, what do you think? What's your favorite World War II content that isn't Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers? What is your favorite Brendan Fraser movie? What is your favorite weather movie? Let me know in the comments below, or let me know on the Film Peaks app. It's free on iOS and on Android. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the top.